When Sony announced that they would be doing a movie for Morbius, I figured that it was rather fitting because the only thing that I ever really expect from Sony's Marvel team nowadays is Morbius. I mean, with Spider-Man, one of the faces of Marvel, they just couldn't seem to keep the ball rolling from a decent starting film. But I kept a positive mentality, and it was originally intended to be released on July 10th of 2020, but then everyone forgot how to be nice to each other during times of need, and it got delayed until July 31st. Then March 19th of 2021. Then October 8th. Then January 21st of 2022, and then finally settling on April 1st of 2022. Which is pretty symbolic for how many times it got delayed, right? There's no way that this movie could turn out to be more than anything but a joke. Sony not handling the properties well, reshoots, delays that got spanned over 2 years, Jared Leto. I mean, the movie just seemed like it was going to be a failure in epic proportions before it even came out. Then the reviews started coming in from critics and people who got early screenings, and man, they were pretty unhappy with the film.
Morbius is terrible.
As Morbius ends up feeling like the worst blend of a origin tale and vampire film.
I mean, really unhappy. People left and right were just trashing this thing. And I like to think that I'm the kind of person that can keep an open mind and wait to form my own opinions on a film rather than listening to the general masses, because if there's anything the general masses likes doing, it's complaining about everything and everything for attention. Like people trashing on Iron Man 3 all the time, which I actually enjoy for the most part. It's got problems and strange changes, but people complain about change for the sake of it, so I'm gonna let them bitter their lives by complaining while I'm out here smelling the flowers. Not actually outside, with real flowers, of course. What do you think I am, some kind of wilderness explorer? No. But it was hard not to be swayed by it, I'll admit, and me and my brother went into the theater thinking that it was going to be another Venom 2 where we think it's going to be bad, everyone said it was going to be bad, and it was bad. But when we left the theater and looked at each other to see how the other one felt, to our surprise, we actually both kind of liked it. Now let's get this one thing straight. This isn't the same sort of enjoyment we got while watching No Way Home or The Batman. Those we actually enjoyed thoroughly. But this movie actually doesn't have as many negatives in my mind as like Venom 2 does. There's not a lot you can honestly spoil from this movie as far as the plot or character appearances if you've seen the trailer, but here's your warning for spoilers. Trust me, there's not much that can be really spoiled, but here's your warning. Morbius is no cinematic masterpiece and definitely has some issues, which I will talk about in a second, but one thing that I want to get out of the way is that everyone was complaining that the visuals in this movie were a complete dumpster fire. And yes, the scene where Morbius is sort of in the middle transition between human and complete beast mode does look a little bit strange, but so does the live action version of Zombie Strange in the trailers, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Let's talk about the good before we get to the bad stuff. To my surprise, Jared Leto actually plays the character of Michael Morbius pretty well. I know, I didn't think that this could actually happen with his track record with other comic book related material. But to be fair, it must be really hard mentally to play a comic book character. I mean, Batman started drinking again after Justice League, The Flash assaulted some people in Hawaii, and Deadshot slapped a man on stage because he didn't like his wife's Milk Dud cosplay. So it must be pretty difficult, right? But honestly, he plays the character pretty well. He seems humble and caring for the other characters around him, and he gets a Nobel Prize for creating an artificial blood that he turned down at the ceremony because he hasn't cured his own disease yet and still sees himself as a failure. He basically grows up in an institution that helps him with his illness, and he meets his best friend there who has the same illness, so he is trying his absolute hardest to find their cure before they die. Even when he becomes the vampire and cures himself, he wants to get rid of it because it's uncontrollable and he sees it as nothing but a mistake. Now, like I said earlier, the CGI does have some questionable moments, but even the biggest MCU films have moments like that, right, Black Panther? But when he is in his full beast mode, he looks incredible, and the echolocation you see in the trailer is just the tip of the iceberg because they really explore that thoroughly through the film, and it gives off this like sort of vibrating white smoke effect that looks really good. Also, the scenes where he is jumping or gliding around look incredible. I mean, the colors of the smoke that's around him are tied directly to the color of clothes that he is wearing, so it's not always just some like static color like black smoke. And the director uses slow motion actually pretty well here, and it's not used too often. It's only really used when it needs to show you like a detail in a fight like Morbius being injured, or just to have a cool scene and see him dodging bullets in like bullet time. Some of the camera work in the film is actually pretty good as well. Like in the cargo ship scene, you actually have the point of view of one of the mercenaries that he kills, and it looks brutal. It also has some decent wide shots of the city or him jumping around the city, and also in the underground part in the finale. So if the visuals are the main complaints of the film, I just don't see it. And if Jared Leto being in the film scares you away from it, then it shouldn't, because honestly he does pretty well. I also really appreciate the comedy in this movie because it's much more subtle and toned back than you would expect, especially after coming off the back of Venom and Venom 2. The Venom films really leaned into the comedy and took their giant crappy comedy stick and just beat the crap out of the script until they felt satisfied. But with Morbius, it's mostly just subtle one-liners here and there, with the exception of like one little getting dressed dancing scene, so I appreciate the restraint. Now let's talk about the bad stuff, because there are quite a few things that really stick out even for your first viewing. The plot is pretty cookie cutter as far as an origin story is concerned, and if you've seen the trailer, you basically have the whole plot start to finish in mind. And this movie really likes to lean on tropes and stereotypes as well. I mean, you have a scientist or doctor that does some sort of like questionable experiment on himself that turns him into a monster. It's pretty common. Morbius' friend with the same illness took the cure without Morbius knowing, and where Morbius actually wanted to find the cure for that beast, his friend did not, saying how they were the evolution and yada yada. You know how it goes. Oh, and his friend's name is Milo. Well, sort of. Michael called him Milo at the beginning because that's what he calls all of his friends at the institution as a kid before they disappear and then someone else becomes Milo. His real name is Lucian, and he's played by Matt Smith, who also did a pretty good job. But once Morbius calls him Milo, literally everyone else in the movie calls him Milo even though that's not his real name. Until the very last scene in the movie, and then he's called Lucian again. Also, you can really tell that this movie had reshoots because for one, there are like 4 different scenes in the movie where they dubbed some audio over a part, except you still see the character's lips moving and it's not even close to what the dubbed audio is saying. How do you miss that? Also, the pacing is a little all over the place, more towards the front half of the movie, or at least it was more noticeable at that point, but also it feels like there are missing scenes. Like, we get the scene in the trailer of him going to the cave to capture the bats, and when they swarm around him, it just cuts to another part and he just has the bats caged later. Not a single bit of dialogue or even a reference about how he got away from these killer bats swarming him, or even how he got them into a cage and back to his lab. Any sort of mention to Spider-Man is completely left out, like the poster in the background of one of the trailers. Yeah, that's gone. And the Vulture is in the film, but only in the end credit scene, but the way he turns up doesn't really make sense. So remember how everyone came to the MCU if they knew Spider-Man's identity in No Way Home? Well, Vulture just ended up in a random cell in the same sort of fashion as Venom, in the sense that they were just like a bright light and then they were teleported to another universe. That doesn't really make sense. Yes, Vulture knows Spider-Man's identity, but why did he leave his universe and go to another strictly because he knew Spider-Man's identity? And if that could go both ways, then wouldn't a ton of other people get ported out to the other universes since the world knows who Spider-Man is at that point? So there's definitely some issues as far as the plot and pacing. And it's hard to really tell if the reason that I liked it so much is because I thought it was going to be hot garbage like Venom 2, and I was surprised to find out that it kind of wasn't, or I actually kind of enjoyed the film. But I can say with confidence that I'd rather watch this film twice in a row in one sitting than watch either of the Venom films once. It has some issues, but it's definitely not worthy of a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. However, the 65% of the audience rating is probably a pretty fair assessment because me and my brother both rated this movie as a 6. So if you could take anything away from this video, it's don't be part of the masses and let everyone else make your opinion up about a film before you go and see it. Keep an open mind and you could be pleasantly surprised like we were. Thank you so much for watching this short review of Morbius, and if you enjoyed, be sure to hit the thumbs up. Leave a sub to show some love, and as always, have a marvelous day.